think Truman talked about a blockade with Admiral King and with General Marshall, but decided that a blockade would take a long time. It might not still get you to surrender. And I think the bottom line was still for Truman, I've got to hold American public opinion together. How long can I hold the American public into believing that unconditional surrender is the way to go? And I guess, no mystery here, the Achilles heel of all military operations in America is public opinion. You got the public behind you, you're in good shape. Once the public sours on some sort of military operation, watch out. So I think that was why Truman ultimately decided saving American lives not really a good alternative to get the Japanese to the table.
Earlier in my career when I was a grad student, I spent some time looking at origins of the Cold War in Asia, and one of the things that we spent some time studying was the reality of racism in the American conduct of the war against Japan. And I think that there's a fairly well-documented historical body of evidence about that. Is there any validity, though, to the notion that Truman used the bomb against Japan because they were Asians, and that racism played some factor in that decision?
Well, I don't think there's any doubt that there was a lot of racism, and certainly our treatment of Asians in the 20s and 30s certainly supports that. And unlike the Germans, the Italians who looked like us, the Japanese did not. But I do not believe that racism played any role at all in Harry Truman's decision. And certainly there's no evidence of that. I think it was all about saving American lives, ending the war, and the best way to do it was to use these unproven atomic weapons. And remember that although we had a bomb detonated in the Manhattan Project, no one had ever had a bomb dropped from a plane. And no one was really sure the impact that that bomb would have. So I think that based on everything, it's all saving American lives. And no, on your actual question, I don't think racism entered into Harry Truman's mind at all. He wanted to save American lives and end the war.
When you invoke Clausewitz, I'm reminded too of one of his other pieces of wisdom, which was that ultimately war is not about breaking military organizations, it's about breaking the will of the adversary to continue fighting. So let's go back to Hiroshima and Nagasaki. 140,000 dead between the two bombings. Was it certain that the Japanese would stop fighting even at that point?
No, absolutely not. In fact, after the first bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, the Japanese were prepared to fight on. And it was only after the second bomb was dropped that the emperor himself intervened and said, no, it's time to surrender. But there were still military leaders who wanted to fight on. Now, the Japanese didn't know at the time how many bombs we had. In fact, we used both of the bombs. Another one probably could have been ready in September, and then maybe a fourth bomb in the spring. But the Japanese didn't know that. So yes, if you're talking about war termination and never start a war without knowing what it's going to look like at the end. And I think it's possible that the Japanese could have said, well, let's fight on. But it was the emperor who finally forced it. And you probably know in your history that there was a coup after the Japanese emperor had decided to surrender, in which some of the militarists decided that we should fight on. So yes, you're exactly right. It wasn't sure.
What do you think the sealed the deal, as it were, for the emperor? What do you think was it that made him realize that the cause was lost?
From what I I've read, I think the emperor recognized that Japan, as a culture, as a nation, might well be destroyed. And he, as the emperor, was not willing to see that happen. He was willing to take his chances. And I think that was really the horrific impact of those bombs was such that I think the emperor said, we've got to surrender, because otherwise our beautiful nation, our culture may cease to exist.
So Fred, we're 80 years from the end of the war, 80 years from the last use of nuclear weapons in war. What do you think the enduring lessons are here in 2025?
Well, let me give you a couple of thoughts. We don't really study a lot of World War II in the Pacific because the war ended so precipitously. It looked like we were going to have a big invasion, and we were getting ready to invade Japan, and then boom, everything's over in August of 1945. So I think that the lesson at the time was that atomic weapons are probably the future. But remember, the U.S. was the only country that had the atomic bomb, had a monopoly on it at the time. So fast forward here 80 years later, there are many more countries that have atomic weapons, and there are others who are beginning to look at developing atomic weapons. I think this is a bad idea. Nuclear non-proliferation is where we should go. But I think the lessons for today are that fortunately there never has been another use of atomic weapons. International law continues to say that atomic weapons are legal, but most scholars think that the only legitimate reason that you could ever use a nuclear bomb would be because the existence of your nation state itself was threatened. So I think that's where we are, and I think the lessons are Truman made the right decision, in my opinion. It was a reasonable decision at the time, and I think that today the Japanese would probably agree that for all the horrors of atomic warfare, Japan is a better place.
So Fred, we were talking before we're taking this episode, and you mentioned, or you said that the technology of war has changed over the course of history. If you go back to the earliest days, you're talking spears and swords and